It's,
null and void anyhow.
it's not even voidable, it's void.
Yeah,
as
I
a
mean,
matter of law.
so that's why I thought that we had a discussion that we didn't run across anything like that, but even if we did, I mean, it could very well be that it would be voided anyhow.
Right.
Okay, yeah, and I don't know that it makes a great deal of difference, it was just one of the topics that we had discussed. The next one was actually on 4C, right after that. I believe there was consensus to admit the first sentence, to the extent that the board under ordinance number 2296 purported to establish any personnel policies or pay salaries for employees outside of those policies and pay scales are established by the city. Such actions exceeded that authority granted to the board under ordinance number 2296. Under the understanding that that was not part of really the future legislation, that's kind of reflective, but not necessary to continue business under the new ordinance. And I think there was consensus to remove that, if I'm correct.
Correct.
Yes. Okay.
Yep.
And then, let's see. The last one, and this was the one I wasn't sure about while reviewing the minutes, was on section 2G, and this is regards to the meetings. I believe, and this is where we might need to just take another consensus vote, but to take out the requirement of approval by the city council to accommodate these meetings. And, one great example, looking at the planning commission, the way it reads for the planning commission, which I think is a fine model if we're going especially towards more of an advisory board, the planning commission herein established shall meet at least once a month at a time and place to be fixed by resolution. Now, this is the part I think we might need to look to include. It says special meetings of the planning commission may be called by the chairman or, in his absence, the vice chairman. A quorum of the planning commission is by a majority of the commissioners. So essentially, the chairman and the vice chairman can call a special meeting if necessary without approval of the city council for the planning commission. I don't know why we couldn't do the same for the UUB. And I mentioned this. I don't think it's necessary, and I think it actually is counterproductive to ask the city council to approve their meeting times, and anytime there's a necessary change, our new ordinance would mean they'd have to come to us first. A great example is tonight, when we changed it from a Monday to a Tuesday, they'd had to come to the council and say, we want to change that to a Tuesday, can you provide us the opportunity to do so? I don't believe that's counterproductive. I think the chairman and the vice chairman can make those decisions, but that's one person. I don't know if anyone else, I think Christie spoke in favor of that, but the minutes didn't show exactly if anyone else did, or if it was just the two of us. Steve?
I didn't see any reason to have to pass that through council, and also the requirement that be held in the council chambers. I think we had a discussion about striking that requirement as well.
I think that needs to stay.
I think the preference is to have that in all, unless extenuating circumstances. I think it's best to have it as part of the written record and open meetings and everything else. Obviously, with as many meetings that are held here in the municipal court, there might be extenuating circumstances, and those need to be taken into consideration and have a way to adjust for that. But obviously, it needs to be worded in such a way that the preference is to those be handled in the council chambers, is my opinion, and recorded in proper minutes.
Consensus on that? So, Jim, we're getting all this?
Of course we are.
Thank you.
So those were the things that I had just based off the discussion that weren't reflected in changes tonight, but I thought there was consensus to move forward with. A couple questions that I have just after reviewing, Mr. Dink's findings and everything else. One, obviously, is we're making a great effort to be in compliance with state statute, and one of the first things we recognize is on the composition of the board. We're not in state compliance, so how will that be addressed if we are going to be a 5-member board with 4-year tenures? I didn't see how that was ruled out, or how do we need to do that if we need to do something different, if that's the way we want to proceed with the board?
Number one, I guess I would say that when I dealt with the kind of really the two acts that dealt with the way you could kind of set up your electric utility, items 1 through 8 basically deal with all statutes covering all forms of municipal utilities. The second portion of the memo that the mayor went to at the beginning of the discussion, nonconformity with managing board of commissioners authorized by KSA 12-826, that statute and that act, and I talked about this when we first talked about it at the beginning, was an alternative structure that the Kansas statutes allowed for in cities of first and second class only. So contrary to kind of the statutes that I cite in points 1 through 8 in my memo, the points in items 1 through 5 and at the latter half of the memo just deal with if you are going to set up a commission in accordance with that specific provision of Kansas statutes, then that's how you had to do it. And if you did that, then that, in essence, I think if you review those statutes, it does allow for some handing off of some more responsibilities to this commission that's authorized than the general Kansas statutes do. So, to answer your question a couple ways, if all the EUB is going to do is act in an advisory capacity, kind of as is laid out by this statute, then it's my opinion that nothing in the statute as drafted is in any way in conflict with Kansas laws, okay? Because we're not forming the commission such as is authorized by KSA 12-826. They're just acting in a purely advisory capacity, making recommendations. In essence, that's almost like the governing body designating a committee or a subcommittee to make recommendations to the body as a whole. And you certainly have that authority to do that. And so, in essence, the statute as drafted is just supplementary to Kansas statutes. It's not in any manner inconsistent. Now, if you want to set up the board, I mean, if you want to keep it 5 people, pretty clearly you can exercise home rule and do that, because the provisions relating to the commission composition under KSA 12-826, because it's only applicable to cities of first and second class on its face, it's non-uniform in nature. And by the very nature of that, you can exercise home rule, make it 5 people, you can leave it at 4-year terms, that's not a problem.
Okay. The last question I had actually was in regards to the personnel policies and pay scales, the way that's written in the proposed ordinance. The way I understood that there's really been no interest in rolling back anything, but the way this is written is exactly to do that. At least is the way I understand it. If we pass an ordinance with this sort of verbiage in it, are we essentially forcing our hand to do that in regards to these Gardner Energy employees and the salary structures they're at right now? And would we be best to leave that part out if that's not our intentions to do so? If council's intentions, as we've discussed, and there's a majority of us that feel that way, isn't to do that?
Well, I think you need to make clear that if you're not going to exercise home rule and exempt yourself from the provisions of the statutes, then you need to make clear that you that the ability to hire and fire employees rests back again with the city rather than with the director of the EUB. And as well, and that includes the ability to set personnel policies and salaries. Now, you know, I guess I'd probably defer to Cheryl as to the establishment of, you know, I presume you'd have to account for these EUB employees for in your salary structure on the city side, whereas before that wasn't done. Is that right?
That's correct.
That's correct. They're not currently in the city's salary ordinance that's adopted in the budget for the city component. So you'd need to integrate them into that section.
But they are part of the salary structure that's part of the Gardner Energy's portion of the budget that was proposed, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so in essence, we have
Well,
signed off on that side of it. Because it was part of the budget.
because you
presentation,
signed off on
Budget.
the budget.
regardless of the review process, but it has been.
Right. And I would think you'd want to integrate them. If you're going to do this, you'd want to have one ordinance instead of 2.
Certainly. Right, on that section C, If that's not our intentions, then we need to remove that part because that's not the way